Students often ask me what scale should be used for soloing over a certain chord progression. Since many artists already use the same standard scales, I sometimes suggest that my students learn to use a hybrid pattern based on several scales that will fit the chord progression. Here at the top we see some familiar scale patterns. We're basing these off the C sharp at the 9th fret of the E string, and this is the pentatonic minor, which is probably common to you if you've soloed over rock. It contains a root, a flat third, a fourth, a fifth, a flat seventh, and this pattern is then repeated in the second octave of the scale. Next we see a Dorian pattern, which we can think of as a minor scale with a raised sixth. Because Dorian is a mode that's based off the second degree of a common major scale, you may wish to think of this one as a B major if you already know that pattern, and simply think of C sharp as the root. Next we see the blues scale, which is identical to the pentatonic minor except for the addition of the flat 5, which we see here and here, which creates a chromatic passage in the middle of the scale. And finally the natural minor, which we think of as being a mode based off the 6th degree of the major scale. Because C sharp is the 6th degree of the E major scale, again, if you know an E major pattern, you may wish to think of this as actually E major and just rooted off the C sharp. The example shown in the tablature here is just the first 4 measures of the solo excerpt that we heard previously. The first measure is a series of 4 triplets, and the first triplet is the 3rd, the root, and the 7th of the pentatonic minor. So here is the 3rd of that scale, the root, and then the 7th, and we see these here in the first triplet. By the time we get to the second triplet, we see the A sharp from the Dorian scale come in. So in our first measure, we see that we start with the pentatonic minor pattern for the first triplet. By the second triplet, we've got the A sharp from the Dorian scale, which continues to the rest of the measure. Moving on to the second measure, we're still in the Dorian scale, but by the time we get to the second triplet, we see the G natural come in at the 12th fret of the 3rd string. This is a dead giveaway that we are now in our blues pattern, because here we have not seen this G natural in any of the other scales. When it enters, we understand that we're now using the blues scale as part of the pattern. So heading into the second beat, or the second triplet of this measure, we hear a distinct chromatic series of passing tones that indicate that we're now in the blues scale. By the time we reach the third measure, the background progression begins to include the 6th chord. So here we're going to move to the natural minor, where the 6th from the scale pattern actually matches that which we find in the background chords. Continuing with our series of triplets and using a 3-note per string pattern, we see that all the notes in the third measure can be found with the natural minor pattern. In fact, the picking and sequencing pattern are very similar as we move from the 3rd to the 4th measure, and all these notes again stay inside the natural minor scale. By the end of the excerpt, we hear a pedal tone of C sharp being used to connect notes from the Dorian, the blues, and the natural minor.